Imagine you want to build an empire. You look around at the landscape of the mid-20th century, and you realize the retail board is effectively locked. The undisputed titans of the era, companies like Sears and Kmart, own the metropolitan hubs. They have all the capital, all the leverage, and prime real estate in every major city. If you look at the math, a direct head-to-head fight is a guaranteed path to bankruptcy. If you cannot win the game being played, your only option is to invent a new game on an entirely different board. In 1945, a man took over a small variety store in Newport, Arkansas. Through simple trial and error, he recognized a fundamental economic reality. If he bypassed the middlemen and bought directly from manufacturers, he could radically lower his shelf prices. His competitors were keeping their prices high to maximize the profit margin on every single item. He decided to lower his prices to maximize the sheer volume of items sold. It was basic arithmetic, but it worked. However, to truly scale this concept, he needed a structural masterstroke. That masterstroke occurred on July 2, 1962, in Rogers, Arkansas, a rural town with a population of just 5,000 people. On that day, Sam Walton opened the first Walmart discount city. At the time, the reigning giants of retail possessed a massive, specific blind spot. Accepted industry dogma dictated that towns with populations under 50,000 simply could not generate enough foot traffic to support a large-scale discount store. But Walton understood a deeper underlying variable about rural America. A rural dollar spends exactly the same as a city dollar, and these isolated communities were starved for access to the cheap, bulk goods that city dwellers took for granted. So, Walmart didn't just build stores. They weaponized geography. They engaged in what is essentially geographic arbitrage. Instead of picking an expensive fight in Chicago or New York, they built a massive distribution center in the middle of nowhere. Then they systematically placed their retail stores in a tight, concentric circle around that warehouse, exactly a day's drive away. By the time the coastal retail executives realized what was happening, Walmart had effectively built regional monopolies across the American South and Midwest. They subsidized their own expansion through geographic isolation, growing silently in the shadows of the cities, until they had built an infrastructure that was simply too big to stop. By 1970, the company went public at $16.50 a share. They didn't ring the bell for the prestige of Wall Street. They did it because building out this sprawling, rural infrastructure required an immense injection of capital. But as they grew, the core driver of their success had to shift. You can only conquer so much empty map before you run out of real estate. To survive the next phase of scale, the game was no longer about land. It was about information. To understand this era of the company, you have to stop thinking of Walmart as a retailer and start viewing it as a fiercely optimized, data-driven logistics operation. In the 1980s, they championed the universal barcode to track inventory, but that was merely a foundational step. The pivotal escalation happened in 1987 when they completed a $24 million private satellite network. At the time, it was the largest private satellite communication system in the United States. Why would a company selling cheap socks and lawnmowers need a private space network? Because it allowed the home office in Bentonville to track every single item sold at every single register across the entire country in real time. This specific technological leap fundamentally shifted the balance of power in global commerce. Before this, massive manufacturers dictated the terms to retailers. After the satellite network went live, Walmart dictated the terms to the manufacturers. Because Bentonville knew exactly how fast Procter & Gamble's toothpaste was selling by the hour, they could force their suppliers into a brutal system called cross-docking. Products arrived at a Walmart distribution center and were immediately moved across the loading dock directly onto a waiting Walmart truck, entirely bypassing the need to pay for warehouse storage. It stripped millions of dollars of friction and inefficiency out of the supply chain. Armed with this logistical superpower, they unleashed their next weapon on March 1, 1988, the first Walmart Supercenter, opening in Washington, Missouri. The Supercenter was a stroke of brilliant behavioral engineering. It combined a full-scale grocery store with a general merchandise discount store. Think about the consumer psychology at play here. You might only need to buy a television or hardware supplies 3 times a year. But human beings have to buy groceries every single week. By putting groceries under the same roof as everything else, Walmart guaranteed that customers would walk through their doors at least 52 times a year. It locked in consumer habit. It disrupted the American grocery industry overnight, turning a regional powerhouse into an inescapable economic juggernaut. When Sam Walton passed away in April of 1992, the financial world watched closely to see if the empire would crumble without its charismatic founder. But the systems were too deeply rooted. The data network was autonomous. The supply chains were self-reinforcing. By 1997, the machine pushed past $100 billion in annual sales. The true, terrifying efficiency of this system was proven not in a boardroom, but during a catastrophe. In 2005, when Hurricane Katrina devastated the Gulf Coast, the federal government's response was famously slow and paralyzed by bureaucracy. But before emergency agencies even arrived, Walmart's trucks were already there, loaded with bottled water, Pop-Tarts, and diapers. This wasn't just corporate charity. It was predictive data in action. Their algorithms had analyzed past hurricane purchasing trends, accurately predicted what specific populations would need, and automatically routed the inventory into the disaster zone before the storm even made landfall. They had quietly built the most effective logistics network in human history. But history is relentless. The landscape always changes, and eventually, every empire faces an existential threat. As the 2010s arrived, the very foundation of retail began to shift. The internet matured, and with it came the unstoppable rise of Amazon. Amazon changed the underlying cause and effect of commerce. They removed the need for geography entirely. Suddenly, digital convenience was the only metric that mattered. Wall Street looked at Walmart's balance sheet and saw a fatal liability. They saw 4,700 massive, incredibly expensive brick-and-mortar stores. In a frictionless digital world, physical stores were viewed as a relic, a heavy anchor dragging the company down into the past. For a brief moment, the dominant narrative suggested that the underdog of 1962 was destined to become the Kmart of the 21st century, a giant rendered obsolete by a new technological paradigm. But this is where we see the brilliance of strategic adaptation. Walmart looked at their perceived weakness, those thousands of massive physical buildings, and realized it wasn't a liability. It was a Trojan horse. Amazon possessed the digital infrastructure, but they suffered from a massive, structural physical limitation. They had to ship items from centralized warehouses located hundreds of miles away from the buyer. The most expensive, complex, and difficult part of modern logistics is what the industry calls the last mile, getting the package from a local hub to a customer's actual front door. Walmart did the math. They realized they already had a fully staffed, multi-million-dollar warehouse located within 10 miles of 90% of the United States population. They didn't need to build a new last-mile delivery network from scratch. They were already standing inside it. The problem was, they lacked the digital DNA to operate it. They needed the software to link that physical hardware together. That specific realization drove the climax of this story on August 8, 2016. On that day, Walmart spent $3.3 billion to acquire an unprofitable e-commerce startup called Jet.com. They immediately installed Jet's founder, Mark Lohr, to run their entire U.S. e-commerce division. They didn't spend over $3 billion for the brand name. They bought it for the underlying technology, the algorithms, and the talent. They essentially injected Silicon Valley software directly into Bentonville's hardware. This acquisition was the catalyst for an aggressive, highly calculated counteroffensive. They began weaponizing their physical footprint. They turned their retail stores into a grid of hyper-local fulfillment centers. You could order online and pick up your items in the parking lot an hour later. If you wanted something delivered to your house, it didn't come from a warehouse 3 states away. It was dispatched from the store just down your street. They integrated their massive grocery dominance, the habit-forming engine they built back in 1988, directly into their mobile app. The culmination of this decades-long chess match arrived in September 2020 with the launch of Walmart Plus. It was an omni-channel subscription service explicitly designed to rival Amazon Prime. But it wasn't a cheap copycat. It was a uniquely tailored system built on the back of half a century of relentless, methodical geographic expansion. The trajectory of this company is not simply a story about a store that sells cheap goods. It is a masterclass in the ruthless optimization of systems. They started by identifying the geographic blind spots of their competitors. They grew by leveraging satellite data to squeeze every ounce of inefficiency out of the global supply chain. And when the digital revolution threatened to wipe them off the map entirely, they didn't retreat. They re-engineered their physical empire to fight a digital war. The scrappy operation in the dirt road town didn't just survive the arrival of the digital monopoly. By understanding the real-world variables of logistics, they built the only machine on Earth big enough and smart enough to stand directly in its way. Thank you all for sticking around until the end. Please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel if you found this video interesting. As always, thank you for your continued support. We hope you have an amazing rest of your day.